So number 1 and number 2 on this class opener are going to be exactly like the first 4 questions on tomorrow's quiz. All right. And just like before, the words evaluate, when I tell you to evaluate the variable expression, that means to take the values they give you and plug it in. So Isaac, all you got to do is take the x value of -2 and plug it in right there. There are no other letters. So let's do that. Let's first rewrite it. So as you can see, I rewrote everything exactly the way it is. Maybe I should do the absolute values in blue so you guys don't get confused. So anyways, we have 16, take away the absolute value of 2. Instead of x, I took the -2 and plugged it right in there. And I wrote parentheses, that way it doesn't look like a 2 minus 2, it's a 2 times -2. And then of course a +1, it comes down. So I need to work on the inside of the absolute values here and simplify the inside. So on the inside, I have 2 times -2, which is what? -4. And then we have the +1. And of course, we still have the absolute values. -4 plus 1 is what? -3. So we have -3. We still have the absolute values. And of course, we still have this -16, or 6 minus out in the front. 16 minus. So let me bring that down. 16 minus the absolute value of -3. So this is the new expression that I still need to work out. Do not say minus changes to plus. That does not happen here. Again, if these guys were parentheses, then yeah, you would change it to plus, but they are not parentheses. Absolute values actually tell you to do something. They tell you to find the answer of the absolute value of -3. What's the answer to the absolute value of -3? 3. So you really have 16 minus 3. And 16 minus 3 is 13, and that's your final answer for number 1 on this class opener. So number 2 is going to be a little more fun because there's more letters, more values we need to plug in. So again, I'm going to rewrite it, and again, I am going to put the absolute values in blue so we don't get confused. Okay, so I've set that up right there. I still need to bring down my y value right here, and I need to multiply it with -3. Y is 3, so I'm gonna put the 3 right there. You either could put the multiplication dot, or you could use the parentheses, whatever you want. And then of course it has the plus z right here, and the z is -4. So let's plug in that -4 right there. And of course the x value is up here, -2, so I need to put a -2 right here. Notice that I already wrote my minus sign, but I need to now put the -2 representing the x. So plugging in carefully is the first important step on these, and now let's work it out. On the inside of the absolute values, we have -3 times 3 plus -4. Of course, we're going to multiply first. So -3 times 3, that's -9. Bring down the plus -4. And of course, we have absolute values still around this. And -9 plus -4, that's going to be -13, correct? So we have the absolute values of -13. And over here, we still have a -2. So I need to change that to a plus. So that's really just +2 at the end of it all. +2. So this is what I have so far, and I'm almost done. I'm at my last step. The absolute value of -13 plus 2. Well, what is the absolute value of -13? That's just +13. And 13 plus 2, 15 is the final answer there. 13 plus 2 is 15. So there's going to be 4 of those on the quiz tomorrow. There's going to be 4 of these guys, like numbers 3 and 4, solving absolute value equations. And when I say there's 4 of them, it's really like if you're going to be doing 8 problems, unfortunately, right? Because for each absolute value equation, you need to actually solve 2 different equations, one the positive situation and one the negative situation. So let's actually look at those notes that we had on the board, that we have right here on the board. It says to solve an absolute value equation, you're going to set up the positive situation and the negative situation. I actually write that out, pos, neg, squiggly line. For the positive situation, write it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. For the negative situation, same thing, but on the right side, you're going to change that to a negative. So those are the notes. If you're at home watching this, you could pause it and copy them down if you need them. So I'm going to set up the positive and the negative situation. So once again, for the positive situation, I'm going to write it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. See, this whole thing just came down without these guys. They're not there anymore. Now for the negative situation, it's going to be the same exact thing, x minus 4, but instead of equals 5, it's going to be minus 5 or negative 5, right? So what we truly have is two equations. Let's solve both of them. So on the left side, the positive situation, I'm going to add 4, cancels out, add 4. By the way, when I say cancels out, it really means negative 4 plus 4 is 0. It's not there no more. That's why it's just x. So I have just x equals 5 plus 4 is 9. We are done. That's an answer. Let's go to the other one. And we're still going to get rid of that minus 4 by doing the same thing, plus 4, just like we did on the other one. What you do to one side, you do to the other, plus 4. And I have the x left over, the equal sign. Negative 5 plus 4 is negative 1. So those are our two answers. You need both answers. If you get one right and the other one wrong, you got this one right, you didn't do this one, you only get half credit. You need both answers to get full credit on each of these on the quiz tomorrow. So there is going to be about 4 of these, which means you're going to end up doing like 8 equations for those 4. This one's a little more fun. Again, we're going to set up the positive and negative situation. The positive situation is writing it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. And the negative situation is going to be the same exact thing, but what are we going to do to the 9? Make it a negative 9. And that's the setup. After that, you just solve each of them. So on the left side, I'm going to start getting the x by itself. So the question is, what do I get rid of first? The negative 2 or the 3 that's all by itself? The 3, that's right. So let's get rid of that 3 by subtracting 3. 3 take away 3 is 0. What you do to one side, you do to the other. 9 take away 3 is 6. Bring down the equal sign. Bring down whatever's left, a negative 2x. So I truly have a negative 2 times x. If I want to get rid of that multiplication of negative 2, I want to divide by negative 2. That'll cancel out. What I do to one side, I do to the other. Divide by negative 2. And you will have your answer, x equals negative 3. That's an answer right there. Let's do the other one. Same process. Just like over here, we got rid of the 3 by subtracting 3. Same exact thing. Let's subtract 3. Subtract 3, that'll cancel out. What you do to one side, you do to the other side of the equal sign, so you subtract 3. Now this is where you get a different answer, because over here it was positive 9 take away 3. Right here it's a negative 9 take away 3. You owe $9, you owe $3. You're going to owe a total of 12. So negative 12. Then you're going to bring down the equal sign, bring down the negative 2x. And for my final step here, I'm going to divide by negative 2. Divide by negative 2. X equals positive 6, because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Now, I do want to mention this. Don't get confused. Like right here, you're solving. Right here, yeah, the absolute values, when you do your positive situation, you don't write them anymore. Don't get confused with the first questions up here. This is not solving. This is evaluating. You plug it in, you work it out. So it's not like whoa, I'm sorry, that was weird. It's not like you make these guys disappear. You don't make them disappear. You actually work it out with the absolute values. But when you're solving and you set up the positive and negative situation, yeah, that's when the absolute values disappear. Okay? Let's move on to the next part of our quiz, which is the next part of this class opener. This is where you have an equation, or you want to write an equation when they give you two answers. So they're giving us our two answers here. Our two answers are negative 5 and positive 1. Okay, now if you don't remember the setup, there's the setup. You just go absolute values, and then you put x minus the midpoint equals the distance from the point to the midpoint. Hopefully everybody remembers that. It's on the board right now. It will not be on there tomorrow. So again, maybe I should make this smaller and just leave it right here. I want to set this up, so let's do that. Here's the absolute value. Here's the x. Here's the minus. Now we need midpoint. Well, let's find that midpoint. We are here at negative 5 and we're here at 1. So let's go 1 in. Let's go another in, and that means that my midpoint is -2. So let's write that in there for the midpoint. That's -2. And notice that I wrote it -2 because that minus and that minus is going to eventually change to a positive. So there was a midpoint. Now let's move on to this value out here. It says distance from the point to the midpoint. So if I actually counted, how far is it from any point from this one to the midpoint, which is -2, it's 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units. Are you with me? So I'm going to put equals 3 because that's the distance from the point to the midpoint. Okay. So my final equation that'll produce the answers of -5 and +1 will be the absolute value equation of x plus 2 equals 3. X plus 2 equals 3 is the final equation that produces those answers. So let's move on to the next one. Again, we still have the notes right here. We're going to find the midpoint. Let's find the midpoint. Here's -2. Here's +2. 1 in, 1 in. What's the midpoint? 0. So when I set this up, absolute value x minus the midpoint. What's the midpoint? 0. Equals the distance. So let's put equals the distance from the point to the midpoint of 0. This is the midpoint right here. So that's 2 units. So my final answer is going to be writing it without this -0 because that's pointless, right? If I say what's 5 minus 0, it's just 5. You're not going to say 5 minus 0, right? So let's just write it as a final answer. Absolute value of x, you don't need to put the -0, equals 2. That's your absolute value equation that'll actually give you those 2 answers right here. Let's move on to the next 2. Number 7, we have what we call a proportion. One fraction equaling another fraction. And what do we do when we have proportions? You guys remember from the video? Cross multiply. Okay, no, forget it. Yeah, so yeah, you go sas, right? So we're going to cross multiply. Let's set it up. And the way it works is 10 times 9 or 9 times 10, whatever you want to write. I'm going to go 10 times 9. And then you put equals. And then you go x times 3 or 3 times x, whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to go 3 times x, okay? So what do I really have? I have a nice, beautiful equation with no more fractions in it. It's really 90 equals 3x. And then you divide by 3, divide by 3. By the way, you could use a calculator tomorrow. 90 divided by 3 is 30. And that's your answer, x equals 30. Let me show you one alternate thing that you could do that you should do, all right? Now, what do I mean by that? Anytime you have a fraction, if you could reduce it, it'll make it nicer. So if you wanted to, let me do this right here. I'm going to rewrite this as 10 over x equals, but instead of 3 over 9, what is 3 over 9 reduced to? 1/3. You could change it to 1/3, right? If you reduce it, it makes it nicer. So now you could cross multiply and say 10 times 3 equals x. Oh, 30 equals x, because 1 times x is just x. You get the same answer, right? So if you ever have a fraction that you could reduce, you might as well reduce it and make it nicer. Number 8. I am running out of time. I want to kind of rush through this. Let me emphasize this so much right here. Please, please use parentheses whenever you have more than one term on the numerator or denominator. Please use parentheses. If you don't use the parentheses, you're going to get the wrong answer. All right? If you have 2 terms, 3 terms, 4 terms on a numerator or denominator, use parentheses, and then you could set up the x minus 1 times 4 equals 8 times 3. There it is. X minus 1 times 4 equals 8 times 3. And of course, we need those parentheses to remember to distribute the 4 times x. You'll get the 4x. 4 times 1 is 4 with the minus sign. And then equals 8 times 3 is 24. Let's solve this thing by adding 4 to both sides. We're going to end up with 4x equals 28. And then final step would be to divide by 4, which means that the final answer is x equals 7. If you understand this class opener, you're going to be just fine on the test or a quiz tomorrow.